What I wanted to do now is to go back to the beginning of Haiti as a independent nation, or a little bit before that. You know, when it's Saint-Domingue, the French colony.
Yes. So we're going to give you a quick primer on the Haitian Revolution. And whenever I'm asked to discuss this, I said the most important thing that we should remember to start is the proximity of the Haitian Revolution to the founding of the United States. And one of the things that I do to remind people of that is that the Haitian Revolution starts in 1791, and George Washington is president of the United States when the Haitian Revolution begins. So these two countries are basically intertwined in terms of each other's development in the early parts of their history, going from the 18th into the 19th century. The second thing we have to understand is the value of pre-revolutionary Haiti or Saint-Domingue to the French. What we have, and this is going to be hard for many people to realize, but Haiti or pre-revolutionary Haiti, Saint-Domingue, was more valuable to the French as a colony than all 13 U.S. colonies combined were to the British. Which is an actual fact. Haiti was not, if not the most, but one of the most valuable colonies in the Western Hemisphere, to the point where it was called the Pearl of the Antilles. The Antilles are a group of islands in the Caribbean in that area. So Haiti was so valued that its value exceeded all 13 U.S. colonies combined before the U.S. became independent, and its value to the British colonies. The main source of that value was the production of sugar and rum, but also coffee and tobacco. So the sugar and rum production through sugarcane was extremely, extremely profitable. And the way in which the French kept that profit is that, contrary to the perception we have about, American exceptional, that America being exceptional in all things good, bad, and otherwise, that slavery in America was so horrible, was the worst in the world. Number one, only 5% of the Africans brought to the Western Hemisphere, even less than that, came to North America. The supermajority went to Brazil, and another large number went to the French and British Caribbean. Okay? So the second largest bulk of these Africans are going into these Caribbean countries. So what you have to realize is that slavery is brutal everywhere, but the French have a particularly sadistic spin on the endeavor, largely because if you read French literature, one of the things that they said was that the shores of Africa are always generous. Basically, because the African slaves were dying so rapidly, they were literally dying like flies. The average expectancy of a survival for an African slave that was brought from Africa to pre-revolutionary Saint-Domingue was 5 to 7 years, which means you bring an 18-year-old African kid to work in a plantation, the average death would happen before he was 25 or 26 years old. Right? The French used to do things in order to dissuade women from committing self-inflicted abortions with their babies, which they often did because they didn't want them to have them to live through the brutality of slavery. When women would get 9 months pregnant, the French would slit their bellies open and have the child fall to the ground and extract the child in front of all the other female slaves to make them know you better not abort that kid. They used to put gunpowder in the anal orifice of rebellious slaves and literally have them explode. They would put slaves and bury them underground and put under sand and put molasses over their head and have maggots and ants eat away at their faces. So the French plantation system in Saint-Domingue was brutal is not the word. It was sadistic. It was sick. And one of the main reasons they did not care is because they felt that they could keep shipping Africans in over and over and over and over again. So one of the things you have to understand also is that there are 3 classes of black people that existed on the island. The supermajority of the blacks, over 75% of the blacks that lived on the island before the revolution, were African bosal. Bosal is a pejorative for Africans born in Africa, not on the island. All right, that's up to 70%. That means these people they knew what freedom was. They tended to be more rebellious, more difficult to control. Sometimes they would go into the mountain and form maroon communities that would come down and attack plantations. And they were the ones that were most brutalized, and they were less attuned to the French culture. Next, you had the Black Creoles. Creoles were blacks who were born on the island. Because they were born on the island, they were more acculturated to the French culture. They spoke better French. They also spoke Creole better. Sometimes they were free. Sometimes, like Toussaint Louverture, they owned black slaves that were African, bosal. So you had that factor as well. Then you had the mulatto or biracial. We use mulatto. That's the contemporary term of what we use in Haiti. You had the mulatto Creoles who were born on the island. Many of them were free. Some were slaves. Many of them were free. They owned 25% of the African bosal slaves on the island. So understand, you're dealing with an island, a place where not only whites own slaves, but you have black Creoles who own black slaves, and you have biracial blacks or mulattoes who own black slaves, 25% of them. So because the bosal Africans were at the bottom of the totem pole, even though they made up 70% of the black population, they were despised by the Creoles and by blacks, by the Creole blacks and the Creole mulattoes. The Creole mulattoes hate the Creole blacks because they want to be white because they are more proximate to white. The Creole blacks hate the Creole mulattoes because they think they're better than them because they're fair complexion and they're almost white. And both of them hate the African bosals, and the African bosals hate them both. This kind of class contradiction and conflict plagues Haitian society to this day.
Right. So the revolution, when it does break out, I mean, I know it breaks out in stages, and that there are, part of it is because of kind of internal conflicts within the Haitian elite. That there were people who, on various sides, were actually willing to resort to arming slaves.
Let me. I want to make this flow smoothly for you.
Sure. Go for it.
So, in 1791, there is a ceremony that all Haitians know of. It's called Ceremony Bwakaima. You won't be able to pronounce it if you read it in English because you'll say something like ceremony boycaman. It's ceremony, the word ceremony, BOISCAYEMAN. And now it looks like boycaman, but it's not boycaman. It's Ceremony Bwakaima. Ceremony Bwakaima was basically a spiritual compact fusion between Africans. Some of them were animists, some of them were Muslim, where they had a ritualistic symbolic pact where they swore to bring their spiritual power together to fight their overall oppressor, which was the white plantation owner. Most of the slaves that participated in this were actually Africans, though Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines were said to have been at there, and they were both Creoles. So after this ceremony, a week after the ceremony, the Africans go rambunctious and start massacring plantation owners left and right. Hundreds by the week. At one point, in a week or two, they killed over 1,000 white plantation owners and whites on the island. So the country just falls into guerrilla warfare with the slaves just massacring people left and right. So this becomes an existential crisis on the whole island. The French are terrified. They're starting to send troops. They don't know what to do. And you had the Creole blacks who are worried about how, because some of the Creole blacks own slaves. They're worried as well. Toussaint Louverture is like, we got to stop this. I don't know what to do. What happens is that, don't forget, the Spanish control the eastern half of the island, which is the Dominican Republic. Because the Spanish are like, yo, this island, this country, Saint-Domingue is pretty valuable. If we can find a way to get the high-ranking generals like Toussaint Louverture to fight for us against the French, we can take over the whole island. So the Spanish enter the island and to get the high-ranking generals to say, You guys can get these African Bosal to fight for us. We'll fight against the French, and we'll free at least the elite Creoles of you all, and we'll find a way to deal with these Africans. And Toussaint Louverture and the crew are like, bet. Sounds good to me. We get free. Now, at the same time, you have to remember that these French slaves and blacks and Creoles were more culturally attuned to the French because they basically spoke French. They knew French culture better. So even though they would work with the Spanish because they give them a better offer, they basically culturally would have preferred to be French. So they start fighting under the Spanish. The Spanish train them, and they become very well and adept soldiers. And they start to kick some serious butt of the French. Because the French are so worried that they're going to lose the island, and they're like, this place is too valuable. We can't afford to lose this. They say, listen, we got to cut a deal with these blacks. We'll tell, and these mulattoes, we'll tell them, listen, we'll give you your freedom. We'll deal with the African Bosal together, but we will make you French soldiers, even French citizens, but you've got to fight the Spaniards and get the Spaniards out of here. We don't want to lose this. They're all buying into the French Revolution. With liberty, egalité, fraternity, let us all be Frenchmen together. Toussaint Louverture, who always wanted to be a Frenchman, is like, oh yeah, this is great. I get to be a Frenchman. I get to be a general in the French army. You know, him, this, all of them. They're like, okay, fine. They join the French army. They get more training from the French, and they smash the Africans, the blacks, and the Creoles, and the mulattoes. They smash the Spaniards. The Spaniards are out of here. So now, Toussaint Louverture is kind of feeling himself. He's like, oh, man, kick the Spanish out of here. Now the French know how important I am. You know, I'm going to be, like, rising up the food chain here. It's a little 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's called the British Empire. The British Empire is like, listen, those Spaniards are punks. They're nothing. And the French, we've always thought they were soft. We're going to come to this island, and we're going to put all of these Negroes in shackles, and we're going to take this place off by ourselves. The British send dragoons, like 50,000, 55,000 soldiers, onto the island. They think they're going to massacre everybody. Not so. Toussaint Louverture fighting for the French. He was like, oh, word? Really? In 2 months, 10,000 British soldiers are eviscerated. So much to the point where David Geggis in his book says that the British in their London paper said there was not a single Briton who did not suffer a loss of a friend or family member in the Haitian campaigns. So the British, the whole army is decimated, and they evacuate in shame. So now Toussaint Louverture is really, really smelling himself because they make him governor general. He's basically implementing the Constitution where he has a semi-formal slavery where only the Creole blacks are free, but the African Bosal are still in a kind of quasi-slavery system called a corvée. The mulattoes, also because they're jealous of him, actually go to war against the Creole blacks. The Creole blacks defeat them, and the mulattoes flee. There was actually an internal conflict between the mulattoes and the Creole blacks in the Haitian Revolution, but they flee and eventually come back with Leclerc. And so Toussaint Louverture is good. So he's even asking some of the white French to come back to the island, and he's pissing off a lot of his fellow generals like Dessalines because he's like, yo, listen, why are you going to invite the French back? And why are you putting the Africans back in shackles? Now, even though Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture are both Creoles, both blacks born on the island, there's another little class distinction between the two of them you have to remember. Toussaint Louverture was a free person of color like 20 years before the Haitian Revolution begins in 1791. So that means he not only owned slaves and property, he's dealing with the French on equal terms. He's dealing with the British. He's a businessman. So he's looking at the world almost kind of like an elite, almost with kind of European eyes. Dessalines was a nouveau libre. He didn't become free until the revolution begins in 1791, and he was a brutally beat slave. So even though he was a Creole born on the island, he kind of has more of the worldview in line with the African Bosals who are brutally treated. That difference in worldview relative to the Europeans, the plantation system, and everything else will dictate how these men operate in relationship to the world throughout the rest of the revolution and for the rest of their lives. So that's a very important thing to know. So what you find is that Napoleon takes over France. Napoleon is like, I don't care about no Toussaint Louverture. I don't care about no Dessalines. I want all the epaulets ripped off these Negroes' shoulders. I want to either put them all in shackles or we're going to exterminate them all. And he's like, I'm sending dragoons of soldiers. So he's like, I'm going to send maybe 55, 60,000 soldiers to pre-revolutionary to Haiti alone. Bang. And I'm sending another 20 or 25,000 to New Orleans. Why? Because Napoleon's plan is that after he beats the blacks in Haiti, he's going to take the soldiers in New Orleans and colonize North America because he owns the Louisiana territories and take over the North American territory. So he sends his brother-in-law, Leclerc, who was a great general, and Leclerc eventually dies of a yellow fever, and then he brings in Rochambeau, who's a savage, brutal barbarian. Just puts slaves in gas chambers, 6 live dogs on them to kill them. And Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines are kind of scared. The Africans are like, yo, we can beat them. But don't forget, Toussaint Louverture has never really fought Napoleon's army with his own body. Because of all this, the Dessalines is like, yo, what are we going to do? And some of the Creole generals end up fighting for the French to subdue the Africans. But Toussaint Louverture eventually gets captured by Napoleon. They take him back to France. He's in prison, and Dessalines has a treaty of Arcueil. Is a treaty at one point where he has the African Bosal, the Creole blacks, and the Creole mulattoes. You're like, listen, we got to come together and kick these guys out of here, or they're going to destroy all of us and put us all in shackles. And they all come together, and they're inspired by the fact that they take Toussaint Louverture, and they come out with a war cry called Coupe tête boule caille, cut off their heads and burn their houses. And they savagely destroy the French, massacre them, destroy the plantations. It's a total scorched earth warfare, going buck wild on the island, and destroyed the French army to the point where they go to the Battle of Vertières in November 17th or 18th of 1803. They defeat Rochambeau at Vertières in a massive battle in the hills, destroy them totally. And in January of 1804, Dessalines claims independence, while Toussaint Louverture in 1802 died in a French prison, begging Napoleon to send him back and let him be governor general. And Napoleon dies, saying his biggest mistake was not allowing Toussaint Louverture to be governor general. Because Napoleon fails at his attempt to defeat the Haitians, he had to send his 25,000 troops in New Orleans to the island. They get destroyed at Vertières, and North America is protected. And in order to finance his losses in Haiti, he sells Thomas Jefferson the Louisiana territories, which doubles the size of the United States, for less than 8 cents an acre. So not only does Haiti protect the United States from being taken over as a French colony, it literally allows the land sale that births this nation into the republic that it becomes, which is a most powerful country in the Western Hemisphere, thanks to just Jacques Dessalines.
All right. That was really good. I want to for people who want to go to read a little bit more deeply in this, like I know, like sort of basic reading, a lot of people are probably familiar with is
Black Jacobins, which is like, it's okay. I don't like the way he deals with Dessalines, and there's not a lot of good explanation of the class dynamics. It's all right. It's a decent book.
What else would you recommend?
The Making of Haiti by Carolyn Fick. It's not a bad book. Laurent Dubois was out of the Duke. His books, Haiti, the Aftershocks of History, and his book on the Haitian Revolution is not bad. Laurent Dubois, Dubois. Look him up. There's a lot of good stuff coming out now, but it's hard to find a good comprehensive Haiti that goes into the dialectical material analysis of the revolution, which is what I tried to give you.
Fair enough. Well, you should write one. So
yeah.
All right. Thanks, Pascal.
No problem, Ben.
You have been watching a free public preview for a Patreon exclusive episode of Give Them an Argument. To get the rest of this episode, plus Patreon exclusive episodes every single Thursday, as well as Patreon exclusive post games, after the regular show every Monday night, and a lot more, head over to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. As a friend of mine used to put it, why be foolish?